I'm John Smart from John Smart Architects. Basically, the structure of our company, I think, is quite unusual. We also run a construction company and a development company. And this sort of triptych arrangement really allows a lot of versatility in the things that we do and the things that we are interested in. So primarily, we'll do anything from finding a site to writing a brief for a site, constructing it out, and then dealing with the end occupiers. The project I'm going to talk about today is the Coach House, which is a personal project that I built for my family. And I think really the nature of the structure of our company and what we actually constructed on the site were very dovetailed together. The relationship of the organisation, the freedom that allows, is very much dovetailed into the exploration that we took on the site. So primarily our interest in the organisation is very much about a craft-based activity, and it sort of harks back to the notion of master builder, where the architect is sort of very much in control at the kind of critical point of production. And for our interest really in making of architecture, we sort of see in today's climate, the industrialisation of making is very much about cataloguing materials and actually buying materials off-site. So the nature of actually doing it for oneself allows a different pursuit. It allows an investigation into really how things are made. And as I say, being very much in control at the critical time. So often, architects hand information over to a builder, and then it sort of can end up in the realm of the kind of contingent. So I think concrete in itself, it sort of crosses that bridge between what I call the craft theorist, being architect, and craft maker. Let's just put that in a very in a clumsy way of calling that builder. Concrete sort of bridges the two. It's sort of there's a notion of knowledge, but also very much deeply embedded knowledge in terms of how you go about it. I think the first thing that we sort of set about the Coach House was concrete appropriate to a domestic environment. My wife's Danish and my kids are half Danish, and I'd spent a season the year before going around to see many of the great Danish buildings, in particular Elegance churches, but also some of the Utzen. So they were very influential to me in terms of looking at concrete. Also, my childhood background, growing up in Bexhill by the Dulwich Pavilion, which is one of the world's renowned concrete classics, but also just relationships with seaside, whether it's concrete walls or sandcastle making, I suppose, but just having that connection about materials and how they can be very organic and sort of responsive to their situation. So looking at, we had an inherent interest in using concrete, and considering how it may appear in a domestic environment was, I suppose, an instant challenge. For my mind, architects don't like using the word cosy. They like falling in upon their own falling in upon their own language of making a sort of constant architectural reference. I think what we try to do in our practice is actually to make an element of livability and a sense of domestication and sort of ordinariness about what how we inhabit space, but using concrete, which is typically seen as a hard material, threw up that challenge. So cosy is a kind of word I use, and I think in Danish they sort of call it hygge, which is this notion of being very snug and very cosy. So that was a sort of instant quality that we wanted to apply to the concrete. So the building split into three layers. On the lower ground, there's a concrete level, which sort of resonates with the world of the garden and the sort of cavernous quality on the ground. And the first level is a sort of constructed timber element, which is sort of boat-like form. And then I suppose at one level, there's this narrative of a boat sort of sitting on a kind of concrete platform, and this boat sort of journeying between Denmark and the UK, as we often do as a family, but also the reference back to where the building started in this journey of being influenced by some of the materials there. So that using concrete sort of, again, as I say, it sort of crosses this bridge between being a very practical material at one level, giving the building some thermal mass, giving it some structural gymnastics, but it also sort of works with the poetics and the phenomenology of the qualities that we're looking to seep out. We used a series of elements within the building, so some were very structural. We used this sort of cantilevered lower ground slab, which gave a lot of freedom in the plan and a lot of movement to express certain elements. And then thereon there was a series of concrete pieces of furniture that became elemental within the space, and they really became a sort of typology that were interlinked, almost like a family relationship. There was a concrete staircase, there was a sort of concrete structural wall that became a sort of feature wall, and then there's a concrete fireplace and some other smaller pieces externally. So there's this constant sort of interconnection with the material. And for each piece we use very different treatments. I suppose we initially worked with David Bennett, who was an excellent sort of source to get us off the beach. But I think David was deliberately holding back in terms of the sort of lot of the information that was required, because I think he was very true about that actually the making becomes the teacher. You only really understand the sort of tacit knowledge of how the sort of inner knowledge to the actual art of making, and I think that had some very testing moments. So the first thing we actually did was this feature wall, and that was sort of board marked, and I think there'll be images of that within the presentation. And we'd use we'd made all the formwork on site using direct labour, and I think just to make the formwork alone took something like 3.5 weeks. But it was very much 99% joinery, 1% pour is sort of analogy that I took. And then thereafter we did the concrete slab, and again with that we used some very refined MDO boards, which are sort of velvet-like, and they give a very satin finish to the concrete slab. But on the day that we poured, it was something like 30 degrees temperature, and the concrete turned up absolutely rock solid. We did things like the slump test, but actually we had the concrete mixer guy saying we had to pour there and then, and the end result was actually, it was drying, it was sort of kind of being poured. So we had quite a hit and miss affair after that, trying to tidy it up. But I think that's, again, it's about living with the imperfections of it and sort of not being too precious, really, and actually it's sort of telling its own kind of story. So we did a lot of repair work, but actually the patina that occurred through that is actually what sort of enriches it and gives it its very much sort of authentic quality. And then there's also a staircase that we used, and that's looking at using a lot of black stone and a lot of black dye. So again, in terms of trying to get the recipe right, it took an enormous amount of struggle, because we were sort of slightly stabbing in the dark. A, in terms of trying to really work out what we're doing, and B, trying to find out, kind of crack the formulas to get the kind of consistency. So I think we had something like 40 different cubes, so kind of frustrating, like firing a lot of blanks. But we sort of got there in the end. It was a bit of a long haul. But then I think really once you've cast it, there's this whole latent sort of treatment that one has to apply in terms of getting the perfect polish and perfect kind of machinery and tooling. And again, a lot of that is a trial and error, really. So kind of hit and miss affairs. And again, through working with the contingent of the material, one finds actually hidden surprises. And I think again in the slide presentation, one can see that actually we erred and cast the concrete stair on the wrong side, and on the exposed face there's this whole kind of cappuccino effect. It looks like a moon crater, and on first appearance you think the whole stair needs to be recast, but actually then you look at the wonderment of it all and you think this is actually fantastic. So we've lived with things like that, and I think again you even if you crave that, you could never actually create it. So if you can kind of work the mishaps and the naivety, I mean, I can only kind of give the idiot's guide to concrete, because I think actually that is really very much its essence, to actually be a little bit clumsy with it and to let mistakes occur, because actually through the mistake is a whole kind of treasure chest great qualities to eke out. Another element that we cast was a concrete table where the fireplace sat on, and again a huge underestimation of just the sort of mechanics of working these weights and the sort of deadness. When we cast it on the side, and we thought that maybe 2 people would be able to turn it over, but actually we tried 4 guys, 8 guys. We were multiplying and sort of doubling it up, and actually it took 16 guys to turn the table over. It was like dealing with something that had rigor mortis, and it was just a dead weight. So complete, again, underestimation of just the sort of physics of the material. But I think now living with it, we recently had an open house event, and which people really applauded it. There was a lady who came around and said, immediate approach into that. She goes, well, this house is crazy. It's got a concrete staircase. How stupid they got kids. And I think since then I have kind of questioned that with a very small child. I'm constantly aiding up and down the stairs, but at the same time it gives wonderful qualities in the house. We've got a house that is completely enriched in material. It's all about the material, and a house that we believe will kind of sustain our whole family journey. So very authentic piece of whether architect being client, maker being living for your own home is a good thing. I mean, it's sort of almost like living on a hall of mirrors, I suppose, looking at all these details every day. But architect as client, I don't know. That was a challenge because I suppose the pursuit of perfection is everything. If you have a embedded interest in that, but for all its imperfection, there was perfection. So I think we certainly got there in the end. Thank you very much.